Okay, so let's start class. Today we are doing the Bronze Age collapse. So let's review where we are in history, okay? So remember, the four early civilizations are Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, and of course, China. And as we discussed, the reason why they are the first four major civilizations is that they have major rivers that allow them to develop agriculture as well as trade overseas. And as we discussed, what will happen is that they will have a major city, and this major city will have colonies along the major river, okay? So in Egypt, it's the Nile. In Mesopotamia, it is the Euphrates and the Tigris. And the first city is Uruk. China, it's the Yellow River, right? So Indus Valley is the Indus Valley. It's the Indus River. And now these different city-states will go to war in order to control trade routes. And this leads to a time of major innovation in human history. At the same time, because of these wars, they need better and better equipment. And so eventually they will develop bronze. Okay, bronze. Bronze, as you know, is an alloy of tin and copper. So you need both in order to create bronze, which is the strongest metal. It's ideal for shields, for armor, and for swords. And whoever has more bronze weaponry will win any war. The problem, though, is that tin, it's actually hard to mine and to discover and to excavate and to manufacture. In fact, tin deposits are scattered all around the world, okay? So this is tin over here, over here, over here, and over here, over here. Okay, they're everywhere basically, but it's not concentrated. Therefore, you must now build more trade routes in order to access tin, okay? So what's gonna happen now is that more trade routes will develop in order to access tin. And the major points, the major trade routes will become cities themselves, okay? All right? And now this world is globalized in order to facilitate warfare. Now, what's interesting is the Indus Valley itself, it's not like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. It is not engaged in warfare. We've done archaeology in the Indus Valley, in modern-day Pakistan. We have not discovered weaponry, okay? We've discovered bronze, but we have not discovered weaponry. In fact, we believe that in this valley, it is a peaceful, egalitarian, and artistic civilization. But it's still brought into this global system. Why? Because bronze changes from weaponry into status, okay? Meaning people use it for pottery, for jewelry. And then eventually what happens is that bronze itself becomes capital, all right? Now, what we also know is that this world is heavily globalized. There's a lot of trading, and this world is complete, meaning it touches every corner of the world. But starting in about the year 1200, this system collapses. In fact, the collapse is sudden and devastating. So remember, if you know Chinese history, you will know that this is the Shan dynasty, right? Guess what, guys? About the year 1200, it collapses. All right? And we know this because Egypt is under attack during this time by the Sea Peoples. And what we believe is that the Sea Peoples are actually refugees who are fleeing the destruction of Europe. And what we believe is that there's a perfect storm engulfing this world at this time, okay? So this perfect storm includes climate change. Climate change leads to drought, which leads to famine, which leads to a migration crisis. What's gonna happen is that the Sea Peoples are gonna come in from the north, and they are going to wipe out existing civilizations, including Mycenaean Greece and the Hittite Empire, okay? The Hittite Empire, which is in Anatolia, which is in modern-day Turkey. Why Mycenaean Greece and the Hittite Empire are important is we believe they are the two major antagonists in the Trojan War. You may have heard of the Trojan War. Well, guess where? Guess what? Troy is here, okay? So Troy is in the center of global trade, and that's why people fight over the location of the city. So the Mycenaean Greece is being destroyed, the Hittite Empire is being destroyed, and Egypt is being under attack. Egypt will survive the invasions of the sea peoples, but after the invasions, Egypt will be exhausted and it will lose its global power status, okay? Indus Valley will be itself overwhelmed because of refugees fleeing in from the steppes, okay? Mesopotamia, it's very interesting about Mesopotamia, but it's actually the most resilient of all the 4 major civilizations. And the reason why is Mesopotamia, throughout its history, is constantly at war, okay? So Egypt is protected by natural geography, by the desert, the Sahara Desert, and then by the Red Sea, okay? So Egypt has natural boundaries. China also has natural boundaries, but Mesopotamia does not. It's a flat land. So it's very easy for the mountain people to come invade, and it's very easy for outsiders to come and build new empires. In fact, throughout Mesopotamian history, there have been 3 major empires: the Akkadian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and the Assyrian Empire. And it goes back and forth. And these empires are not, they don't really last that long, maybe a couple hundred years at most, because this area is so competitive. But because it's so competitive, it's actually much more resilient than the other areas, okay? All right, so again, the big question for us is, why would this world collapse like this all of a sudden? And it's really relevant for us to understand because many scholars have compared the Bronze Age world to our world, because our world is also one that is heavily globalized, and it seems like it's on the verge of collapse. So why is it that this sort of like globalized world, in which many countries are getting very wealthy, why do they collapse all of a sudden? Okay? And the argument I will make to you today is it has to do with the nature of capital. Okay? So what I will show you is that this is a proto-capitalistic system. And what we know about proto-capitalism is that it allows for rapid growth, but then it also allows for rapid collapse. Okay? So let's go over the idea of capital. What is capital? Okay, so capital has 3 major characteristics, okay? The first is that it is universal. Universal just means that everyone wants it. Everyone in the world believes it has value, okay? That's number 1. Number 2 is that it is a store of value. And what this means is that you're able to take wealth and store it inside this commodity, okay? And the third thing about capital that's very important is its mobility, okay? Mobility, meaning I can take this thing and then transport to somewhere else at little or no cost. If it has these 3 characteristics, then it is capital, okay? And throughout human history, there have been different types of capital. So let's look over some examples. So one example is grain, right? Just food. Grain is sort of universal because everyone wants to eat, but not everyone thinks it's valuable, okay? And it's hard to store value in grain because it could decompose easily, right? And it's actually hard to transport grain because it's cheap, but it's expensive to transport, okay? And that's why grain never became capital. Now, let's look at cattle. Cattle, like cows and sheep, it's a better form of capital because you can store more value, and it could be universal, but it's actually hard to transport. And that's why cattle never became capital, okay? Now, if you keep on moving on, you get into slaves, right? Human beings. And so you can have woman slaves, sex slaves, you can also have man labor, okay? And this is a better form of capital because it's sort of universal, okay? You can store value in it, but the value is uncertain or unstable. And it's mobile, okay? So slaves became an economy, but this is a very basic economy. Then you develop bronze, okay? And bronze now is extremely valuable, okay? Everyone wants it, so it's universal. You can store a lot of value in it because it's hard to make, and now you can move it around, okay? So in other words, bronze became the first real universal currency in the world. And this allowed for rapid globalization in the world. So think of the equivalent of bronze today is, of course, the US dollar, right? The US dollar is universal. Everyone wants it. It's a store of value, and it's mobile as well. And so it's a US dollar which allows for the rapid growth of capitalism around the world. Okay? Now, let's discuss how capital works. All right, so what we know is that we humans are actually composed of two natures. We are composed of an altruistic nature, and we are composed of a utilitarian nature, okay? Altruistic just means that you care about human relationships. You want to be nice to people because you want to be their friends, they're part of your family, okay? Utilitarian just means that you don't care about others, you just care about the goal, the profit, money, power, okay? And we're composed of both sides. So think about when you go to a restaurant, right? If the meal is good, you pay a lot of money for it and you give the waitress a tip. When you go home to dinner and your mother is happy to see you, your mother cooks you a really nice meal and then you say thank you, right? You don't want to do the opposite, right? Where you go to a restaurant and you're like thank you and then you leave. And you don't want to go to your mother's house and like say to your mother, hey, this meal was fantastic, here's $1,000 for you, okay? It would screw everything up, okay? So we have two different natures and we keep them separate. What capital does, that's very interesting, is that it moves us from the altruistic state into the utilitarian state. And at first, that's good. Why? Because when you're altruistic, you don't really want to do anything, okay? Because you don't want to offend other people. So there are lots of villages in the world, and they're static. Why? Because for them, what matters is not change, what matters is harmony. And these villages, it kind of sucks to be an outsider. It kind of sucks to stand out. In fact, there are some traditions in which if you're outspoken, if you are thoughtful, if you like to explore, if you're curious, they will kill you and make you a sacrifice to the gods because they see you as a threat to their social system. Okay, so an altruistic system, it doesn't like change. So if you don't do anything to it, it just stays the way it is. So when you bring capital, people now are more motivated to work hard. People are more motivated to innovate and to explore. So at first this is good, okay? Now you're expanding the system. And then you reach a point of its maximum growth. But then what happens is the scale tips over, okay? And people become too utilitarian. And when you become too utilitarian, you cheat. You don't care about others. And this causes a lot of problems, okay? You start to exploit other people. And so when you become too utilitarian, the system collapses. Okay? Does that make sense? Capital comes in the system and it makes it grow really fast. Once it hits a certain point, then it has to collapse. Okay? So let's use another example. Let's just say that you are a leader of a group of people, and it could be a village, it could be anywhere, okay? And if there's no money involved, what do you care about? You care about status. You care about your reputation. You care about how other people see and perceive you, right? So you care about the feelings of others. Once capital enters the equation, then the way that the leader sees you is different. The leader sees you as a commodity to be exploited, okay? The leader is not like, how much money can I make money off you? Not only that, but the leader, okay? The leader will do what? The leader will align with other leaders, and they will become a cartel, okay, or an elite. And they will together exploit people, okay? But not only that, but they will expand and look for new areas to conquer, okay? Because all they care about now is money, how to expand the capital. But once the capital expands too far, then what happens is only a few people have all the capital. And the people down below, they're enslaved, they're exploited, and they want to destroy the system. They become indifferent. If you force them, they will revolt against you. So the system must collapse, okay? So the argument I'm trying to make to you is, this is just the way capital works, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, that's why the Bronze Age grew, but that's also why the Bronze Age collapsed. And that's why our world grew, but this is also why our world will collapse as well, okay? That's the argument I'm making to you today. Any questions before we go to the PPT? Is this clear to you guys? All right, let's go to the PPT. All right, so this is a map that shows you the world of the Bronze Age. And as we discussed, these are the four major civilizations, right? China, Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, okay? And they now, because of that war, they have an insatiable need for bronze. And bronze needs tin. Where's tin located? Tin is located where the stars are, okay? And you can see they're scattered over the place. So what they're going to do now is they're going to build trade routes into these tin places that will allow them to extract the tin to create bronze armor, okay? But when they do so, they also create new civilizations and new cities until you get a completely globalized world. So this is China, and as you can see, they're always at war, and so they need weapons, okay? This is pottery, bronze pottery from China during the Jiang dynasty, during the Bronze Age. All right, so how do we know that it's a completely globalized world? Because over the past 200 years, we've discovered shipwrecks. Okay, so we've discovered ships that were transporting goods during the Bronze Age. And so when you dig up these ships and you analyze where the products are from, you're able to rebuild the trade networks, okay? And that's why we know about the Bronze Age. Okay, so what's gonna happen is this. The green is the copper sources, okay? And as you can see, there's a lot of copper sources. The problem is the tin sources are spread out. So in order to create bronze, you need to constantly expand your trade networks outside, okay? And as you can see, what's happening is that the expansion keeps on going until it encompasses the entire world. So the dark brown is the earliest trade routes, and then the pink are the later trade routes. But as you can see, it's always expanding outwards in order to facilitate more and more trade. And what's really important for us to understand is the entire world is encompassed, okay? So this is Britain, this is Ireland, this is Scandinavia. Okay, this is important because if you study history, it's the British Isles, Scandinavia aren't often discussed during in the Bronze Age, but recent research has shown us that it's all interconnected, okay? Okay, so as I mentioned, these are trade networks, okay? And these gray spots are areas that are major nodes in the trade network. They come about because of trade. The red are the major consumption areas, okay? So the gray are areas that are being created in order to better facilitate trade. And eventually, you reach a point when it's completely globalized, when every source of copper and tin has been discovered, and there's a massive trade network built around each area. Okay? All right, but again, as we know, even though this area is extremely globalized, extremely wealthy, only in about 50 years, it completely collapses, okay? And we know because of the Egyptian records. Okay? The Egyptians write about the coming of the sea peoples. And so if you just watch the arrows, okay? This is the movement of the sea peoples. These are refugees fleeing famine. And what do? Well, they team up with pirates. Okay? And the pirates and the refugees together overwhelm existing civilization, including the Mycenaeans, okay? Present-day Greece, including the Hittite Empire, present-day Turkey. And they keep on attacking, okay? Even from the south, people are attacking the major cities. This is a world in complete collapse. Okay? This is another map showing the invasions, okay? These again are the sea peoples. These are just economic migrants. These are refugees. Similar to what's happening today, where if you're following the news in Europe, you've got all these Middle Eastern refugees coming into Europe, overwhelming their economic systems. So this is a trend that we can expect to continue for a very long time, okay? All right, the sea peoples are just a mix of different people. We've tried to identify where they come from, who they are. We really don't know, okay? So the assumption is they come from everywhere, and they are being led by pirates who are expert at raiding other nations, okay? And this is a painting from Egypt. Again, we know because the Egyptians left records of the invasions of sea people. There were at least 3 major invasions of sea people. We're talking like hundreds of thousands of people attacking Egypt at the same time. And Egypt had to expend tremendous resources to repel these invasions, but it ultimately left Egypt bankrupt, okay? This is Eric Klein. He's an anthropologist at the University of Washington. He wrote a book called 1177, okay? And he lists the reasons why the Bronze Age collapse happened. And he says it was a perfect storm of crises, including climate change, which led to drought, which led to famine. There were also earthquakes. We're able to do analysis and discover that there were major earthquakes during this time. There were revolutions, there were civil wars, there was a migration crisis, okay? So it's a perfect storm of crises. But what I want to show you today is It all has to do with the nature of capital, okay? This is a proto-capitalistic system. All right, so my argument to you today is, yes, the Bronze Age collapsed because of a perfect storm of crises, that's what we know, but I want to extend this and say, it has to do with the fact that it was a proto-capitalistic system, and so capital drives you to prosperity, but then it will also drive you to crisis, okay? That's the argument I will make to you today, all right? And we've seen this before. So this is the world right before World War I. As you can see, it was heavily, heavily globalized, okay? And people thought that because of trade, because of prosperity, we can't go to war, because why would we? And then, you know, a couple years later, World War I, where tens of millions of people died for no reason, okay? Tens of millions of people died for no reason. It was just a slaughter. And what I want to argue to you is that this is a very common thing. And if you look at the Bronze Age collapse in World War I, we are in a very similar situation, where the world is heavily globalized, it's heavily interconnected, but because of the nature of capital, we will probably fall off the edge at some point, okay? And people would argue that we're already reaching this point. Okay, so again, during the Bronze Age, okay, the High Bronze Age, the Late Bronze Age, 1400 to 1200 BCE, you can see this entire world is interconnected. And what you will also see is at the center of this world is really the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, okay? And which city is the most important strategically in this world? It's called the city, Troy, right? Troy, which is why we have the Trojan War. We will discuss actually the Trojan War next class, okay? But I point this out to you, okay? So why is this happening? Well, think about how in a proto-capitalistic system that depends on tin and copper, how do you make money, okay? Well, there are different ways. The first way you can make money is mining. Guess what? It sucks because it's hard work and you don't make that much money out of it, okay? It's just labor. Another way is processing it into ingots. Ingots are just ways to transport the tin and the copper, okay? You can also manufacture new jewelry, pottery, and weapons. Okay, that makes more money. Transporting, it's hard work, but you make more money, okay? Another way is just piracy, just steal the stuff. But the best way you can make money actually is by controlling trade routes, okay? That's what Troy is. Troy is a control of a trade route. And so that's how you make real money during globalization, okay? That's why even today, the Middle East is so important because the Middle East is a center of all global trade. So whoever controls the Middle East controls global trade, okay? So remember this idea. We have empires because empires really are trade routes. Empires are just control of trade routes. Empires back then is very different from empires today. Empires today would be like nation states, which controls borders and have their own language. Back then, empires were just a collection of different trading points, okay, that were aligned with each other. And the Trojan War was just a trade war. That's all it was. We'll discuss this next class, okay? Okay, so you can see why Troy is so important. Because if you're in Anatolia, it's mainly mountains. It's good because you can mine for precious metals and it's easy to defend, but it's hard to access the sea. That's why Troy is so important, okay? All right, so again, we know about globalization during the Bronze Age because of shipwrecks, okay? So this is a very famous shipwreck that we discovered off the coast of Turkey called Uluburun, okay? And inside it, you can see all this precious pottery. And we can actually date the location of where the pottery came from. Okay, so these are major sources of tin. And what's really important, this map tells you, is that they're actually in mountains. Okay, so they're hard to reach. That means you have to spend a lot of effort to create trade routes based on tin. Okay, these are ingots, okay? This is how you transport tin and copper. You transform it into ingots. And what's going to happen is that because the tin is located in isolated areas and it's high mountains, they have to use every form of transportation. And so in Europe, they mainly use the river system. And that's why all of Europe is brought into this trading network. This is Scandinavia. And as you can see, there's a lot of trade focused on Scandinavia as well. Okay? And this is something that we've not known before. We just assumed that Scandinavia didn't actually exist back then. It did exist. Okay? And it's a very important part of the trade network. Okay, so let's talk about the Indus Valley civilization. the Indus Valley civilization, for the longest time, we know was peaceful, egalitarian, and religious. And we know because we're able to dig up the cities. And what we discovered is that it's very much similar to Catholic, where the housing is very similar, where irrigation, where hygiene, it's all very advanced. And we have no evidence of warfare because we can't find any weaponry. Okay, so why is Indus Valley so peaceful as compared to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China? I think it was because they were able to trade with Mesopotamia, China, and Egypt and discovered we don't want this system. We don't want a system where everyone's killing each other, okay? That's my guess, but I don't know. No one knows, okay? This is one of the Indus Valley's major cities that we've dug up. This is another. As you can see, it's pretty advanced. The houses are pretty equal. It's very similar to Catholic, okay? A much bigger version of Catholic, which we discussed previously. This is an artist's rendition of what Indus Valley city would look like during that time, okay? What's amazing is that it's very advanced, it's very hygienic, it's very peaceful.